Have you ever tried to find joy when everything around you seemed to fall apart? Have you ever smiled sincerely while facing a storm inside? It feels impossible, doesn't it? Yet that's exactly what Paul did, and more. He wrote one of the most inspiring letters in the Bible from inside a cold, damp prison cell, surrounded by uncertainty. The letter to the Philippians wasn't written during a celebration, but in the middle of confinement, trials, and the real possibility of execution. And still, it overflows with joy, contentment, faith, and hope. Not that fake smile of someone pretending everything is fine, but a deep joy that flows from unwavering trust in Christ. The kind of joy no circumstance can steal. In this message, you'll discover the behind-the-scenes of that letter, learn how Paul saw life through different eyes, and understand how to cultivate real joy even when life gets tight. Get ready to be challenged, stirred, and above all, inspired. Because if there's one thing Philippians teaches us, it's that prison doesn't get the final word. It's easy to be joyful when everything's going well. But what about when the bills pile up, the diagnosis shakes you, or the doors keep closing? That's where we learn the difference between circumstantial happiness and the joy Paul describes. He was in chains, uncertain of whether he'd live to see the next day, yet he wrote about contentment with an almost unsettling enthusiasm that shows us his joy didn't come from outside, but from within. Not from comfort, but from conviction. A joy anchored in Christ, not in circumstance. Can you imagine writing a letter full of gratitude and encouragement while awaiting a possible death sentence? Paul did. He found meaning even in suffering because his life wasn't centered on comfort, but on purpose. Every obstacle was a chance to strengthen faith and spread the gospel. And this wasn't empty optimism, it was real faith, rooted in the one who conquered death. When you understand that Christ is greater than any crisis, even life's prisons take on a new color. And that changes everything. We often tie happiness to achievements. When I get that job, when I get married, when everything calms down. But Paul flips that mindset on its head. True joy doesn't wait for peace, it blooms in the storm. That's revolutionary. And that's the beauty of Christian faith. It lets us smile even without guarantees. So next time everything feels dark, remember Paul in prison. He didn't just survive, he radiated hope. And maybe, just maybe, you can find that same light. Paul's story is one of those that makes you believe in impossible new beginnings. He wasn't neutral toward Christians, he was a persecutor with authority to arrest, threaten, even condone killings. But everything changed in a moment on the road to Damascus. A light struck him down. A voice called his name. The hunter became the disciple. That encounter with Christ didn't just change his direction, it redefined his identity. From a man filled with hate, Paul became someone who breathed grace. And that's a living lesson that no one is too far gone to be transformed. Think about the impact on early Christians. Many feared him with good reason. Suddenly, the most feared name was now preaching the very gospel he once tried to destroy. That wasn't just a conversion, it was an inner revolution. And what's even more powerful, Paul didn't become a superstar in the faith. He chose the path of service, humility, and surrender. He accepted prison, hunger, beatings, and rejection, all for the very cause he once despised. All because of one encounter with Jesus. Who would have thought the greatest persecutor would become the greatest preacher of grace? But this radical transformation isn't just about Paul. It's a reminder to you and me that no one is a lost cause. Maybe you're battling addiction, guilt, your past, or a sense of unworthiness. But look at Paul. If God could do it with him, he can do it with anyone. Sometimes what looks like the end is just the beginning of something far greater. And all God needs is a willing heart. If you doubt that, maybe you're about to walk your own road to Damascus. Because real transformation isn't self-improvement, it's rebirth. The founding of the church in Philippi wasn't the result of a grand strategic plan, it was divine intervention wrapped in a bit of chaos. Paul and Silas were there out of obedience to God's call, but ended up wrongfully imprisoned. And race, the fascinating part, instead of falling into despair, they sang. Yes, they praised God inside a jail cell. What happened next? A violent earthquake shook the prison foundations and opened every door. But even more shocking, Paul didn't run. He stayed. And that decision changed a life forever. The jailer, thinking everyone had escaped, nearly took his own life. But Paul stopped him and shared the gospel right there. That hardened man, shaped by prison life, was broken by grace, and that very night, he and his whole family were baptized. That's how the church in Philippi began, not in a temple, but in a moment of faith in the midst of pain. It's amazing how God can use the most unlikely settings to plant something eternal. Who would have guessed that a dark prison cell would become the cradle of one of Paul's most beloved churches? It teaches us that God doesn't need a stage or applause to begin a great work. Sometimes the hardest scenes in our lives are the very places where something new will be born. Philippi began with worship behind bars, an unexpected conversion, and a faith that spread. And maybe that's the point. The true church doesn't rise from structures, but from transformation. When we grasp that, even our cloudy days look different. So if your life feels like a prison today, maybe God is preparing something that will impact generations, just like he did in Philippi. Philippians may be small in size, but it's massive in impact. Written from prison, it doesn't carry the darkness we'd expect from someone in chains. Quite the opposite, it pulses with joy, faith, and gratitude from start to finish. That's why many scholars call it the Epistle of Joy. Paul doesn't deny suffering, he turns it into fuel for contentment. Instead of complaints, he offers praise. Instead of despair, he reinforces hope in Christ. It's as if he's saying, yes, the pain is real, but it won't control my faith. One of Paul's secrets in this letter is focus. He lifts his eyes off the prison and fixes them on Christ, and he invites others to do the same. Rejoice in the Lord always isn't a polite suggestion, it's a bold call to see beyond the present struggle. Paul knew the Christian life isn't about avoiding problems, but about finding peace and purpose within them. Real joy isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of faith. This letter is like an antidote to discouragement, a dose of hope wrapped in humility and truth. The beauty of this epistle also lies in its personal and affectionate tone. Paul doesn't preach from a pedestal, he writes like someone sitting beside you with a cup of coffee, saying, I know what it means to suffer, but I also know whom I believe in. That kind of writing hits the soul. And the best part? It still does, even centuries later. When we read Philippians, we don't just get instructions, we find comfort. And sometimes, that's what we need most, a gentle reminder that joy hasn't been canceled, just relocated to Christ. Contentment might seem like an outdated word today. We live in an age of more likes, more success, more comfort. But Paul, writing to the Philippians, offers a powerful contrast. He says he's learned to be content in every situation. And that didn't come from a self-help book or a breathing technique. He learned it through hardship, suffering, and lack. And his secret? I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's not about self-reliance, it's about dependence on Christ. This kind of contentment isn't passive, just accept it and move on. It's active, bold, mature. It means seeing provision in little things, hearing God more clearly in silence. When Paul talks about being content in lack or abundance, he's not romanticizing suffering, he's showing that Christ is enough in both extremes. And that's liberating, because we stop chasing outside validation and start finding stability in God's presence. A faith like that doesn't shake in the wind, it grows deep roots. Hey, raise a practical challenge. Next time something doesn't go your way, instead of complaining, take a breath and ask, what can I learn from this? Write it down, pray about it, share it with someone. Contentment isn't automatic, it grows. Just like Paul learned, so can we. And when that lesson takes hold, life changes. Because it won't matter what's missing in your account, your body, or your heart if Christ is present. You truly can do all things. Not because you're strong, but because he is. Unity and humility, two simple words, but hard to live out, even for the most seasoned believers. Paul knew this, and that's why he wrote so clearly to the Philippians, do everything in love, putting others before yourselves. Tough, right? But he didn't just throw that out there. He pointed straight to the ultimate example, Christ, the one who, being God, gave up glory to become a servant. If Jesus chose humility, who are we to cling to pride or competition? Unity isn't accidental. It's built through daily choices, forgiving when it's easier to ignore, listening when you'd rather talk, serving when you're tired. Paul reminds us that the church isn't a stage of stars, but a body where every part works together in love. And that takes effort. Living in unity means fighting against selfishness, silencing pride for the greater good. But hey, race, the beauty when a community lives like that, it shines. It becomes a living reflection of Christ to the world. Want to live out humility day to day? Start small, give a sincere compliment. Let someone go ahead in traffic. Listen without interrupting. It may seem like nothing, but those small acts create a culture of honor and service. Paul didn't write these words as theory, he lived them. And today, they still call us lay down your pride, embrace grace, walk together. Because when God's people choose unity and humility, the world takes notice. And the gospel isn't just preached, it's seen. Paul doesn't hold back when talking about the generosity of the Philippians. They didn't just give money, they gave from the heart. Even while going through their own hardships, they chose to bless Paul and support the spread of the gospel. And he makes it clear this wasn't just material help, it was worship. It was faith in action. When someone gives joyfully and confidently, they're declaring with their actions, I believe God is my provider. And in heaven's eyes, that has immeasurable worth. Generosity isn't about how much you give, it's about the spirit you give with. The church in Philippi didn't give out a surplus, they gave because they trusted. They saw Paul's needs as opportunities to participate in the mission. And Paul, in return, not only thanked them, but assured them that God would meet all their needs according to the riches of his glory in Christ Jesus. What a beautiful promise. When we realize that generosity is part of our worship, it stops being a duty and becomes a privilege. It's not about having to help, it's about getting to join what God is doing. Want to start living this out? Don't wait to feel ready. Start small, just start. It might be an offering at church, a meal for someone in need, or even giving your time to listen to someone hurting. Generosity is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And the most surprising thing is that in the end, the giver is often more blessed than the receiver. Paul saw this in the Philippians, a church that worshiped with their resources, their faith, and their hearts. Why not follow their example today? It's easy to lose focus when everything around us seems to be going wrong. But Paul teaches us to see beyond that. Instead of viewing his prison as an ending, he saw it as a doorway, a new path for the gospel. Can you believe it? He even says that because of his imprisonment, the entire palace guard heard the message of Christ. That's the power of an eternal perspective. Paul wasn't tied to the here and now. He saw trials as bridges, not barriers, and that transformed his pain into purpose. How often do we view hardship as punishment when it could actually be the setting for transformation? Paul knew that suffering doesn't cancel out calling. In fact, it often sharpens our spiritual hearing. Rather than panic, he uses imprisonment to write, to pray, to disciple. In other words, he bore fruit even while in chains. And that's challenging because it shows that the problem isn't where we are, it's how we see where we are. And faith changes our lens. So hey, raise a question to reflect on: what if your current pain is the stage for a future testimony? What if today's crisis is opening unseen doors? When we adjust our focus toward eternity, the present takes on new color. The question shifts from why is this happening to me to what does God want to teach me here? Paul didn't deny the pain, but he refused to be defined by it. And that's our invitation to keep your eyes on heaven, even when your feet are in chains. We live in a world where the self is at the center of everything. My will, my space, my truth. But the letter to the Philippians goes against that tide. Paul challenges believers not to look only to their own interests, but also to the interests of others. That sounds almost offensive in today's culture, where selfishness is disguised as self-care. But the gospel isn't about self, it's about others. Following Christ means stepping aside, yielding, reaching out. That's not weakness, that's spiritual strength. Paul presents Jesus as the ultimate model of this lifestyle. The Son of God, with all authority, chose the path of surrender. He didn't just serve, he emptied himself. And that's the posture his followers are called to imitate. The problem is we've learned to admire that humility from a distance, but we struggle to live it up close at home, in traffic, in the grocery line. But Paul is clear living the gospel means reflecting Christ in our actions, not just in our Sunday words. Hey, raise a practical challenge for 1 week. Make it a point each day to put someone else first. It could be a family member, a co-worker, even a stranger. Notice how it confronts your ego and your faith. Because serving takes courage, loving takes sacrifice, but to live like Christ is to be light in a world used to darkness. The Philippians were called to that, and today, that calling still echoes. The question is, will you respond? Paul ends his letter just as he began, with grace. But it's not just a polite sign-off, it's a declaration of dependence. After all the trials, imprisonments, sufferings, and miracles, he recognizes it was Christ's grace that sustained everything. It wasn't his brilliance, his discipline, or his courage. It was grace, that invisible strength that lifts you when you fall, that holds you when things collapse. The same grace that met him on the road to Damascus was still carrying him at the end. And more than anything, it's the grace he wanted the Philippians to experience too. Some days, our strength runs out, our faith wavers, and quitting seems like the only option. It's okay to admit that even Paul had days like that. But what he learned, and teaches us so clearly, is that grace isn't just the starting point of faith. It's the fuel that gets us to the finish line. When we understand this, we stop trying to hold ourselves up, and we start walking lighter, more confident, because even when we can't, grace can. It covers, it lifts, it fills. It's not earned, it's given. And that changes everything. Want to walk in that strength daily? Start your mornings by asking for grace, not just blessings, but presence. Instead of listing your strengths, admit your limits to God. He doesn't reject those who depend on him. In fact, that's when he works most powerfully. Philippians reminds us that the Christian walk isn't about performance, it's about perseverance. And it's grace that keeps us standing. In the end, Paul doesn't point to himself, he points to Christ. And maybe that's the greatest secret of all. And now, after walking with Paul through prisons, letters, and life-changing lessons, the inevitable question arises, what will you do with all this? Will you let this be just another inspiring message, or will you allow it to transform how you live, choose, and respond? Because if Philippians teaches us anything, it's that living faith requires daily practice, not perfection, but consistency. Have you ever thought how your life would look if you faced crisis with the joy of someone who trusts? If humility became your norm, generosity your mark, and Christ the center of your strength? Paul wasn't superhuman, he just found the source. And that same source is available to you today. The invitation is here live with contentment. Serve with humility, endure with faith, and above all, trust in grace. If this message spoke to you, if it stirred something inside, don't keep it to yourself. Like it, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next message, because the journey doesn't end here. There's still much more to discover, to learn, and to live. Let's walk this path together.